Do this. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week where we are talking about careers in the court system. And so, what I thought I would do, I have Professor DeLeon here with me, who teaches in our department, primarily on the Armstrong campus, but her background is as a prosecutor. And so, who better to kind of tell us about becoming an attorney, kind of studying for the LSATs and things like that than someone who has gone through it. So, Professor DeLeon, thank you for kind of being with us today.
Of
Um, and I just have a couple of questions, uh, kind of go through, and feel free to add anything that I might forget to ask about. So tell us a little bit about your background.
So I grew up here in Savannah. Went to school here. My undergraduate is at Swanee in Tennessee. I majored in English and originally thought I was going to be a English professor straight out of, I was going to get my master's and my PhD. And while I was getting my teaching certificate, I got really interested in education law because I had to be teaching in the public school system in high school. And from then, that spurred my interest in more broadly into public service. And I decided, well, maybe I can best use my skill set, being an attorney. And so I started studying for the LSAT late. It really wasn't until my first semester of my senior year that I really got serious about studying for the LSAT. So for those of you that already are seniors and are a little worried that maybe you're behind the ball, absolutely do not be. Maybe the admissions process will just be a lot quicker for you to handle, but you can absolutely do it your senior year. And so I took a LSAT course in person on campus at my university. And there are also online courses you can take. And then from there, you get your LSAT score, and then you just start applying. Everything is virtual now, or everything's online for applications. So it's super seamless. And then once I got into law school, I decided I was going to stay in Georgia. That was really important to me. And because I want to be close to family. But I truly believe it doesn't matter where you go, as long as you know yourself and study hard in your law school and end up passing the bar in whatever state you wish to practice it. And so I went to Mercer Law School, and then straight out of Mercer, I started interning over the summer at a DA's office, district attorney's office. And then that's when I realized that I wanted to be a prosecutor. And so your third year of law school, you start studying for the bar exam this summer, and then you take the bar, and then it takes several months to receive your results back. And so then once you receive your results, then you can start actually really knowing where you want to end up as far as employment. But I'm sure you're going to ask more questions about that.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. So let's take a kind of a step back and talk about the LSATs, because we have a lot of students who want to be attorneys, and I've covered the LSATs, and I know you teach professional development as well, and I'm sure you cover the LSATs as well. What can students expect? I know that the LSATs have changed here recently, like some of the I think it's the logic section has changed or something like that. But
Mhm.
um, kind of give us an overview about if people are really intimidated about the LSATs.
So I think with any national test like that, any performance test, it's truly not necessarily how much you know, it's how you know how to take the test. You don't have to be super smart, right? You really don't. You just need to know how to take the test, how the questions are phrased, and you need to train yourself how to be able to look for the right answer. And so most of it is reading comprehension, a little bit of logic, some memory. But truly, it's about learning how the questions are phrased and then how to pick not the right answer, but the best answer. And that's very similar to the bar as well. And so, my best advice for studying for the LSAT is to take test after test after test after test, because it's not a subject matter test. It's truly just trying to look for the right answer. And so I would take as many practice tests as you possibly can. They have plenty you can take for free. There are books you can practice with if you don't feel like you have the money to actually take an in-person course. And then you go in just like you did for the SAT to a testing center, and you sit down. I believe the LSAT's only 2 hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours, and you just complete it on a computer at one of those centers.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the free resources because before I got my second master's, I had thought about going to law school. And so that's what I did was I pulled up the free LSAT study guides. So
Mhm.
they are out there, everybody. If you really want to go to law school and think that's your path, there's a lot of free resources. And even I think the Khan Academy offers some training and some free tools
Yes.
for that. So tell us about law school. What advice do you have for people wanting to get into law school, and then once they're in law school, what advice do you have?
So the way that you apply is you apply online. You use what's called the LSAC, LSAC. It's the online platform that most accredited law schools use in order to assess you as a student. You collect your letters of recommendation by sending emails to certain individuals, and then they submit their letter of recommendation to this online platform. And what's really great about that is that online platform then disseminates it to all the schools that you want to apply to. So, it's really kind of like a one-stop shop. So you're not having to have and do it that way yourself. So it is very easy to apply. I would always look at sort of the way law schools are rated are is based on a tier system. Usually it's by the median LSAT score. And so knowing what you get on the LSAT, you kind of know where you're going to apply to law school. Is it going to be like a tier 1 school, a tier 2 school, or a tier 3 school? And let me just rephrase, I truly don't think it matters if you go to a tier 3 school, which is they pretty much let in anybody, or a tier 1 school that's your Ivy Leagues. Because ultimately everyone has to take the same bar exam in their state. So if you know that you are a really hardworking student, maybe you don't have the best grades, then and maybe your LSAT score isn't very competitive, apply to that tier 3 school because you just are trying to get in. You're trying to get in somewhere that's accredited. And then you excel at that school and you know yourself, you study hard, and then you prepare yourself for the bar exam, which is a very similar test except for it to the LSAT, except for it is based on subject matter, but you can study for it. So once you know kind of where your LSAT score is, you kind of can get the right idea about, okay, my best bet is I'm going to need to apply to a tier 3 school or a tier 2 school in order to actually get into law school. And, from there you can look at, do you want it to be close to where you live? Do you want it to get a scholarship? You're more likely to get a scholarship on a tier 3 school instead of a tier 1 school. And so use all those factors when you're kind of narrowing down your decision to actually know which school to apply to. And then once you get into law school, at least in Georgia and most of the southern states do not allow you to take online classes. And that's because they're very traditional, and the bar, which is the organization that governs attorneys, we call it the bar. They require sort of that intense in-person lecture-based Socratic method in order to find that the school's accredited. They don't allow sort of online asynchronous courses. And so once you're in law school, basically you are grouped with the same individuals probably for the first 2 years of your law school. At least that's how it was at Mercer Law, which is where I went. And so we had smaller sections. So I had about a group of 25 students in my section, and we take the same core classes similar to what you have to take at Georgia Southern. And so that would be like criminal law, evidence and procedure, constitutional law, property law, civil procedure, legal writing, and those are all your core classes that you absolutely have to take. And then towards the second half of your second year of law school and your third year, you can start to realize really what type of attorney you want to be. Do you want to be someone that is has more of a corporate job where it's very unlikely that you're going to be in the courtroom arguing cases? Or do you want to do personal injury where yes, it's a hustle, there it can be a lot of money involved, but you're going to have to be in the courtroom to truly be, if you want to get some of those bigger lawsuit cases? Or do you want to be a criminal defense attorney? You know that you love speaking orally, you love to try cases, and you want to do that, or you want to be a prosecutor. Or maybe you want to be a wills and estates attorney, and you are terrified of speaking out in front of people, but you know that you've got like a really sharp mind, and you know that you can help people with not only their finances, but how they structure their trust and their will and their estate planning. And so you kind of, during your second half of your second year and your third year, you're able to truly understand what type of electives you're going to want to take. And so for me, I knew at first I thought I was going to do, weirdly enough, bioethics law. Like I was really interested in like, okay, this person has donated their sperm here, and then we have a zygote from somebody else, and it's mixed in with this egg, and who has the ability and control over this baby that's potentially born with IVF, depending on if somebody backs out of the situation and is there a contract involved. And then I realized that I'm horrible at science. And so that was not going to be me. And so I realized that I like to publicly speak. So being in the courtroom, I was really passionate about victims already. I knew that I needed to start interning at a district attorney's office to see if it was really something that I could see myself doing long term. And so I started to take constitutional law. I took an advanced con law, advanced evidence and procedure, advanced criminal law to sort of specialize so that I'd be able mock trial, moot court to, really hone in on my public speaking skills. And then, interning is where you really solidify your job later on. And so your third year law school, it really, once you graduate, you don't really start studying for the bar until the summer, because law school is very intense. Like you can try to have a job in law and do law school, but the way the classes are set up, they're pretty much all day and you're studying all day. So it can be very difficult, unless you are super, super organized to be able to hold a job after class, because classes are every day. So, you really don't have time to also study for the bar at the same time that you're studying for your classes. So once you graduate in May, most everybody, the second half of May and then all of June, that's when you take a really intense bar study course. And it's every day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week. And you get the weekends off. And then they prepare you to take the bar exam, which is in July. And then once you take the bar exam, which is in an old airport hangar, so it's this massive auditorium. There are hundreds of tables set up with you can take it on the computer or you can handwrite it. And they have like the National Guard is there to guard everybody to make sure nobody's cheating and there's no disruption. And you take it with everybody in the same room at the same time. And then it takes up until October to find out if you actually pass. And they publish that online for everyone to see.
Wow, that's intense. I didn't realize it was that intense.
It's very intense. I mean, you have people whose computers fry in the middle of the test and, they're flipping out. They may have a backup computer, or all of a sudden they thought their computer was charging and it's no longer charging. And so it's a 2-day exam. The first day is all multiple choice for about 5 hours over specific topics. And then the second day is all writing essay. So some people choose to handwrite, some people choose to type the second day. And that's about 5 hours as well. It's 5 prompts. And you typically allocate yourself about an hour per prompt.
Very cool. That's great information. Again, I'm just kind of taken aback. That's really intense. So you see, those of you who complain about um, writing and things like that, we structure our courses to set you up for success. And so like any undergrad program is going to focus, especially in criminal justice or pre-law, anything like that, to kind of get you used to writing and things like that. And I don't know because I've never been to law school, but I'm assuming legal writing is a little bit different than just a normal essay writing as well.
It is, and so typically in law school, I never had a multiple choice test in law school. It was all writing. I think I maybe had, actually, I hold that. That's not true. I had one multiple choice test, and that was in property law. And it was only half of an exam. And it was like, if A betrothed to B, and then there was something fee simple with a piece of property that they were jointly sharing maritally, and it was sort of like a multiple choice, that type of test. But it's all writing. And so, and I didn't have any grades other than my exam. So having multiple like tests throughout the semester, that never happened for me. My grade was my exam grade. And you didn't have to come to class. Class was not required. And so it was totally up to you to keep track of yourself. And you really did not know how you were doing up until, you know, first semester's over and you get your exam grade. So that's you have to be super organized, driven, in the sense that, maybe you're not the type of person that like doesn't need to come to class. I had to be in class to pay attention. Some people aren't like that, and that's fine. And so that's sort of different too with law school is you don't really have a lot of grades. And your tests are pretty much all written. And basically what the test is it's a factual situation. You're supposed to know the law already, and then you apply the law to that factual situation and you argue it in your paper or in your essay, or blue book is what we call them, blue books. So, you do need to know the law, but more than that, you need to know how to argue and to put your opinion to paper that is persuasive and comprehensive, and logical.
Awesome. All right, so let's go to your time working in the DA's office.
Mhm.
Kind of tell us a little bit about that. Like, what was a typical day like? If there was a typical day, kind of what is your experience there?
So, I was able to start trying cases pretty much right after, well, even before I got my bar results under the Third Year Practice Act, which is something that's reserved for anyone who's interested in being a public defender or a prosecutor. Under the guidance of another prosecutor or public defender, you can use your skills in court and to handle cases. So once I would, but you have to do it under having someone, sit next to you, in court. Once I passed the bar exam, I was already in what's called early intervention program, which was I tried to resolve cases that I thought were really crappy. And so, as a way to not flood the system. And so I would handle preliminary hearings on pretty much any type of major felony. And if I had a feeling that maybe probable cause was really scant, or maybe police officer, maybe an interview that wasn't done very well and the evidence is very strong, I would do my best to try to resolve that case as soon as possible. If not, then the case was bound over and it continued on its way. I really only stayed in EIP for probably about 4 months before they wanted me to start trying cases. And then I was sent to state court where I handled all the domestic violence cases in Chatham County that were misdemeanors. And so I did that for about 2 years. And typically, what your day is like is you're in court, most of the day. probably from between 9 and 11, 1 and 3, or maybe 11 to 12, 2 to 4. And in between that, you're reviewing cases that come across your desk, police reports, assisting victims that walk into the DA's office, and you're pretty much making, judgment determinations on the strength of your case, sending plea offers to it, to try to resolve it, or preparing for trial. And so you argue motions, you write briefs, you submit them, you advise the judge how the factual circumstances apply to the law. And then usually you have about a week, 2 weeks out of the month where you're trying a case a day. That's just the way state court is set up. You try a lot of cases in front of a panel of 6 people, juries. And then you may have a day where the defendant decides he doesn't want a jury trial, he wants a bench trial. And so then you'll have a day dedicated to bench trials in front of whatever judge you're in front of. So I spent about 2 years handling those, and then I was transferred over to Superior Court, where I handled all the felony domestic violence cases. So aggravated assaults involving strangulation, or have a domestic component with a weapon, aggravated battery, terroristic threats, false imprisonment. And then I started to do elder abuse as well, disabled adult abuse, neglect, exploitation. So I got a really cool financial side of disabled and elder abuse, as well as sort of the physical and neglect. And then I handled DD and elder abuse for about 4 years. And then my last 4 years, I was in major crimes. So I got bumped up to major crimes, which is all the 7 deadlies. And so anything that was domestic related to murder, or was a non-domestic sexual assault, aggravated sexual battery, aggravated sodomy, some child molestation, I handled those cases as well. And so in major crimes, you're trying cases every other week, and you're in court doing motion hearings, because based on the punishment, which is typically for the 7 deadlies, it's 25 years minimum or life, with or without the possibility of parole, then it's very rare you're going to get a plea deal. And so you spend about 2 weeks out of every month actually in jury trials for major crimes. And then the other 2 weeks are arguing motions, that sort of thing.
So what is it like to be in the courtroom in front of a judge and in front of a jury? Because we know that argumentation is an art, and kind of we've seen how Law and Order portrays it, but some of us have also watched court TV and actually watched actual court hearings. So in your experience, what advice do you have to students who want to go this route? What's it like being in the courtroom?
So everyone has, their own personality that's going to come through. Some prosecutors are funny and loud and, quick talkers and mover and shakers. Others are more reserved and formal. Some are informal. You're allowed to bring your personality into the courtroom, but you absolutely have to be respectful to the defense attorney, the judge, the jury, and then the court professionals. So there's a way for you to be yourself without restricting yourself too much. And so I think always being respectful to both sides. Things can truly deteriorate if you don't have respect on both sides of the bar with defense attorneys. And in my city, in Chatham County in Savannah, it's very small. We all know each other. Our kids go to the same school, or, we go to the same church. And so, you're going to see this person. You may even go out for drinks at some point, later on in a week, or you may see them at dinner. It's very small. So you have to be respectful. Of course, not everyone is. And so, things can get tense. You try not to make it personal. Sometimes it does become personal, and it's really unfortunate, but that's just the nature of having a very high stakes, very tense situation, when you're putting all of your effort and strength into a case and things aren't going the way that you want, you can see how people can take that and internalize it and things can get pretty bad. But my advice is always, I was always very formal. I like rules and structure. And so that was that I knew that that's how I was going to perform the best was I needed to stay in my lane and within that formal sort of, environment. And so it worked very well for me. There is a difference between state court and superior court. Superior court is much more formal, state court is not. There's still the respect in state court, but you have, the volume of cases is so much that sometimes it's mostly about triage and resolving cases to pleas in state court than it is handling felonies. It also depends on your judge. You could have a judge who is super, super formal and solemn, or you could get one that likes to crack jokes every other second. And so you just kind of have to know your environment and then adapt yourself that way.
I think that's stellar advice. I know from my time as a probation officer and then as a child welfare worker, you see those, I'll say, rivalries between defense and prosecutors. Or we had assistant district attorneys and that did juvenile stuff, to focus just on juvenile. But they would know each other. And so they would be able to inform us as court professionals, hey, they're probably going to ask you about this or be ready to answer this. And then we had a judge who, like you said, would crack jokes every time someone left the room. And then we had a real strict judge who, like, you did not say anything until he spoke and asked you and things like that. So
Yeah.
very
It
good.
absolutely depends on that. And I know that you guys have, I think Casey teaching a criminal law class. I don't know if it's in person but he was my trial partner for probably about a year here in Chatham County before he left the circuit and ended up practicing in Statesboro. But you also have a trial partner that you sort of have to adjust based on their temperament and personality too. Like you don't want to have two, like you want to be the yin and the yang. And so that's really important, to sort of think about. And, I've got students now whose parents are criminal defense attorneys that like I used to argue with all the time. One of them was a public defender in town who I adore. And now his daughters are it's just a very small community. So, it's a job at the end of the day. And so you don't want to risk your integrity or your professionalism or your reputation based off on, a case in court or winning or losing, which I hate to, put it that way because it's truly not about winning or losing. It's about guilty or not guilty and what evidence is present. And so, that's some way you have to think about it is sort of take your ego out of the equation.
So speaking of that, this just kind of came up. How would you handle those cases where law enforcement may not have done a strong enough investigation? Because you still have to keep that partnership with law
Oh,
enforcement.
for sure. So in Chatham County, and at least in Special Victims Unit, which is where I was housed in, I guess you could say, we had a very close relationship with law enforcement, like brother and sister close. Where I could be like, "What the heck do you think you're doing? You messed up that search warrant. You should have run it by me. Like that evidence is going to be out." And so we were very frank, respectful. Like we could say anything to each other pretty much. And at the end of the day, we knew we were going to be not only colleagues, but friends. And that's because they were learning as well, because it's called the practice of law for a reason. Like nobody's ever proficient. And so, you know, I would never advise them on something unless I had done the research, asked all the questions to get the facts. And so that would happen. Like sometimes I'm like, I realize that you didn't necessarily need to Mirandize that defendant because he wasn't in custody or was not being interrogated. But in the future, I need you to do X, Y, and Z because you're going to make my job harder, come trial when I have to have an extra motion hearing where you could have just read him his rights, got him to sign the form, even if you didn't necessarily have to under the Fifth Amendment. So we were constantly working with each other. And typically in SVU, I would get involved from like after someone's reported they've been sexually assaulted, they would call me. I would help them with the search warrant, of course, sort of advise them on where they should go in their investigation. And then we would talk out like what else needs to be done before an arrest, before the case is turned over, to make the case as strong as possible. That doesn't happen with every municipality though. So yeah, unfortunately, I've had to have pretty serious, conversations with some detectives. And I'm like, I can do nothing with this case because you didn't follow through X, Y, and Z. You didn't collect this evidence, even though it could have been a super strong case. Now it's a case where I could see a jury, finding the defendant not guilty where I felt they should have been found guilty. So I'm going to make a plea offer that's going to reflect that anticipation. And so, you have to be straightforward, honest. There's a way to be respectful about it though, because they're learning too. I mean, not every detective wants to handle a rape or an aggravated sodomy. I mean, I get it. Or a domestic violence case where they've seen the victim recant 8 times in court and they don't understand the power and control dynamics that are associated with that. And they're tired and they feel like this victim, doesn't deserve to be held. I totally get that. You just have to find a level playing field to acknowledge those feelings, but push them towards continuing their case to make it as strong as possible. And sometimes the cases are just losers. So they'll turn something over and I'll have to say, unfortunately, I believe that the threshold for probable cause, which is super low, hasn't been met. And so, we will present this case to the grand jury. But if they ask me whether or not I think there's sufficient evidence, I'm going to say that it's possible that there's not and that they need to no bill it, or I'm going to reiterate the definition of probable cause and hopefully they get the hint so that they can make that determination for themselves. And so you just have to be frank, but you have to always answer the phone or respond to emails, because if they feel like you've abandoned them, then that's where you have a breakdown in trust and they won't come to you for help the next time.
Yeah, communication is important in all facets of working with individuals in general. So,
Right.
so my last question is, you worked on the law side. I've worked in the child welfare and in the juvenile realm, dealing with pretty similar cases, and they're horrendous. Can
Mhm.
be horrendous. How did you take care of yourself?
So, I have a wonderful husband who we waited to have children. And so I honestly don't know if now I could handle child fatality cases or even child molestation cases now that I have 2 children now. But you try your best to leave the work at work. It's very, very difficult. It's a 24/7 type of thing. You're constantly thinking about victims you may have disappointed, victims you feel like maybe didn't fight hard enough, or it's your fault that a case came back not guilty, not because the evidence wasn't strong enough. So the highs are super high and the lows are very low. Um, but when you first start out, but as you get older and you stick with it, you stop taking it personally. And so, yes, there may be a sting there for the first day or two, but you realize that you've got other victims out there that you need to help. And so you need to put on your big girl pants and you need to get back in there and keep fighting, because there are other victims that need you to speak up for them just as you spoke up for that other victim. And so I think that's the reminder, is that the system does not allow you to have a pity party. Like there's just too many cases. So you have to keep moving. And then, you try to, on the weekends, try to do fun things, but you start realizing like all of your friends are defense attorneys or prosecutors or law enforcement or probation officers. And so I had a great spouse who is on the complete different side of the spectrum. He's an orthodontist, so he makes people smile and he's with kids all day and he's super peppy. And so that really helps, with sort of keeping me grounded and being an optimist instead of a pessimist and that sort of thing. So I think, just making sure that if you have faith as well, if you are religious, like you lean into that or you lean into your friends or, you get a hobby. I started getting into pickleball pretty intensively, and so that's really helpful. But you do have to be reminded to constantly take care of yourself and that it is a job. And that at the end of the day, like you're going home to your house or your apartment or whatever it is. And so this is your life that you're living, how you want to make the most of it or the best of it. And that requires a daily reminder.
Awesome. And I think it's important for us to just reiterate at this point in time, like we chose to come into this profession
Mhm.
and we know what we're getting ourselves into, hopefully.
Yeah.
And you guys as students, hopefully we've prepared you enough. I know I try to give you as realistic a picture as I possibly can, and I know Professor DeLeon does as well. But it's hard, and you do get calloused in certain situations.
Mhm.
But I think it's just important that you recognize that trauma and maybe take some time off if you need to take some time off and go on vacation, things like that. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Mental health days were everybody had, and that's one thing too about the flexibility of a DA's office is, my boss understood that like it's intense. So if you need a mental health day, like she was fine with us like working from home one day, or, we had a particularly tough verdict that maybe, the next day you don't come into work. And so like there's flexibility there and you can lean on your colleagues for that and try to find the comedy where you can.
yeah, I always said we have very dark humor. Child
Very dark
welfare, like
humor.
very dark humor. So,
Yes, so true. I mean, the things that I thought that I would be laughing about, or, in I would be horrified if, in college, I thought that that would be myself. But, it's just the nature of the beast of working in the criminal justice system. I mean, you have to be able to laugh about some things.
mhm, I agree. All right, Maggie. Well, I appreciate it. Do you have anything else that you want to add for students?
I would like to do a plug for the public interest loan forgiveness program. So it's a federal program that if you decide that you do want to do public interest work, the federal government will forgive your loans as long as your graduate loans, as long as you are working in the field for 10 years and you've made the minimum 120 payments. And so let me just put this into perspective. I came out of law school with over $200,000 in student loans. My interest rate was 7.2%. And I got all of those loans forgiven. I have zero debt because I was in it for 10 years. And I ended up really only paying about 40 grand back. So that's the trade off for those of you that, want to go to law school, but you want to make the big bucks. Well, that also means that you're going to probably be working even all the time, focusing on billable hours. Whereas if you do public interest, yes, your salary will be less, but if you stick with it, then your loans will be forgiven after a certain amount of time. So it's it's a wonderful program. It's there because they realize your salaries are low. And so it helps compensate for that, instead of being in like the corporate world or the personal injury world where you can make a lot of money quicker, you still will be required to pay back all those loans from law school.
Yes, thank you for that. That's been a huge lifesaver for a lot of us. So,
Yes, I know. I feel like everyone in this hallway is like, yes, the loan
yes,
is finally forgiven. It's like a huge weight's been lifted. So it's a wonderful program. So I would factor that in when you guys are talking about salary.
awesome. All right, Professor DeLeon, thank you so much. And everyone, I hope you have a great day, great week. If you need anything, feel free to reach out. I'm sure Professor DeLeon, it doesn't care if you reach out to her if you have questions about law school, being a lawyer, or anything like that. So
No, please do. I'm open. You can best way to contact me is via email. You can find me just by searching my name at Georgia Southern and my contact information. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have or information about being a public defender or district attorney's office. I'm happy to do that. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak to your class.
thank you.